and welcome to the Square Circle, our first edition as a podcast. I'm your host, Adam Byrne, and joining us today, three guests. And let's start by saying hello to conservative columnist Quinn Hillier of the Washington Examiner. Hello.
Hello, glad to be with y'all.
We also have progressive columnist James Rosen. James, it's good to see you again.
Great to be back.
And we are rounded off in our guest tonight with libertarian writer Ash Short of the Daily Wire. Hello, Ash.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. Thank you for coming, everybody. So let's get right into it. This week, President Biden addressed the imminent end of America's longest war, the US troop withdrawal from Afghanistan due to be complete by the end of August. Here's part of what he said.
No nation has ever unified Afghanistan. No nation. Empires have gone there and not done it. We went for two reasons. One, to bring Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell, as I said at the time. The second reason was to eliminate al-Qaeda's capacity to deal with more attacks in the United States from that territory. We accomplished both of those objectives, period.
So, James Rosen, America's longest war is coming to an end. Did America lose?
I hate to say it, but we certainly didn't win. Let me put it that way. It's been 20 years. And 20 years ago, I'm dating myself. I covered the beginning of the war, and it never would have occurred to me in my wildest imagination that it would last 20 years. I could be wrong on this. I don't think any other war in American history has lasted 20 years, or even close to it. And a while back, I read a few articles and talked with some folks about negotiations that were ongoing between the Afghan government and the Taliban. I don't know what you call them, rebels, insurgents, with American intermediaries. And I could tell you that the Taliban will never, they will lie. They will pretend to negotiate. But I am absolutely convinced that they have not changed one iota. 20 years ago, they were pushing people off of buildings who they thought were blasphemous. I think they will still do that if they come to power. So if the goal of the United States, we did go into go against Osama bin Laden. We did kill him later. We've weakened ISIS. But if the goal was to defeat radical jihadism, we absolutely have not done that.
Okay, and Ash Short, bin Laden was killed in 2011, 10 years ago. Why are American troops still in Afghanistan?
I mean, it's kind of a good question at this point. I mean, what did we go there for in the first place? I mean, there's still always kind of questions on what was the real reason, right? And being there 20 years, I mean, that's about 2/3 of my life, more. It's kind of weird to think that I've been alive, spent more time alive with us in Afghanistan than not. And, you know, to just kind of talk about what I'm thinking on the whole issue is that I have to agree with James that we're just not going to be able to accomplish much of anything, regardless of what the starting goals were. Does that mean that the area is not going to be dangerous afterwards? Of course it is. I mean, look what happened when Obama withdrew troops, when Trump withdrew troops or announced he was going to withdraw troops. I mean, you saw these creations of more violent extremist wings like ISIS. So, I mean, the area is going to become more unstable, but there's nothing for us to do there. We can't fix their country. So.
Yeah, and Quinn Hillier, President Biden says that while there won't be a celebration, there is somewhat of a sense of mission accomplished, given that there haven't been terror attacks based out of Afghanistan since 9/11, that Al-Qaeda, their presence has been diminished, and of course Osama bin Laden is dead. So is he right to mark that as an achievement?
Yes, that's an achievement, and that's the main reason we were there. And I think it's absurd to pretend that our presence in Afghanistan did not substantially help in keeping major terrorist attacks away from our homeland. And now that we're gone, the Taliban will surely take over most of the country again, and they will again harbor terrorists, which again can use the Afghanistan territory as a staging ground to attack us and other parts of the world, other allies of ours, in horrible ways. We were not engaged in a hot war there, much of a hot war for 20 years. We were providing air cover. We were maintaining the Bagram Air Force Base, which was crucial territory for forward deployment, not just in Afghanistan, but in case we needed it for the entire region of the world. It was doing us a lot of good, and now we're just giving it up. That makes no sense to me. We have troops in Germany. We have troops in Japan. We have troops in South Korea. Why not keep a modest force in Afghanistan with air cover to keep the Taliban at least at bay in a sort of a messy stalemate, but a stalemate that keeps them from harboring terrorists that can then unleash horrible fury on the rest of the world?
If I can just say, I actually agree. I would rather have us keep a force in Afghanistan. What I was saying was that once we leave, we're going to revert to where we were. And the reason, in terms of celebrating no terrorist attacks in America, based in Afghanistan, there's two reasons for that. Number one, they moved elsewhere. They attacked us from other points. And most importantly, they didn't have to attack innocent civilians in America. They attacked American soldiers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria. So, if that's success, I guess let's keep soldiers there and have more success.
Yeah, I also agree with the idea of keeping a base there, since we have bases in other parts of the world where we're not exactly in war. And I think one of the things that people haven't mentioned yet, and that is kind of an elephant in the room, is how is this going to work and help Iran, who we know is a hostile nation working towards getting a nuke. I mean, you have the Taliban take over in Afghanistan, making the region more dangerous, and that can only benefit Iran.
So so go on, Quinn.
Yeah, let me just add this. We had an Afghanistan working group co-chaired by General Dunsford and by former Senator Kelly Ayotte. And they were told that once we leave, that within 18 to 36 months, the likelihood goes up substantially that an attack based out of Afghanistan, people harbored by the Taliban, will likely hit the American homeland. And most of the working group agreed. These are the experts we appointed to look into that. And what we're saying is we're okay with a possible or a much more likely attack on the American homeland in the next 18 to 36 months. That doesn't make any sense, and Biden is wrong to do this.
But I think the question wasn't should we pull out troops. That wasn't the question. The question was has it been successful over the last 20 years? That was the question I answered. I agree with you. I think we should keep some troops there. I agree with you.
Well, it sounds, if I may halt you all there, that you all agree that the US should keep some sort of troop presence there in Afghanistan. So complete agree on our first ever topic as a podcast. It'll never catch on. So why don't we move on there, talk about our next subject, because former President Donald Trump was back in the news this week with a lawsuit against social media platforms. Here's the story from CNBC.
Yeah, hi, Deirdre. Well, the former president just wrapped up a press conference in Bedminster, New Jersey, a short time ago. He laid out his argument in this class action lawsuit that he says he's filing today against the tech giants for removing him from their services for violating their terms of service. And he brought up his lawyer to make the legal case here. And what the lawyer is saying is they're going to argue that these entities are in fact governmental entities, and therefore this is a freedom of speech issue. There you can see the site in Bedminster where that press conference just wrapped up a couple of minutes ago. They're going to argue that this is about freedom of speech and the First Amendment, and that the Supreme Court should be the ultimate arbiter of who can say what on social media, not the social media companies themselves. The difficulty that the former president's going to have here, of course, is that these are private companies. And as private companies, they have terms of service, and they say that the former president violated those terms of service in his calls to potential violence around the insurrection of January 6th. That was the inflection point at which those services decided to ban him in the first place.
So, Ash Short, this lawsuit, does Trump have a real First Amendment argument here, or is this just another of many frivolous lawsuits?
He doesn't have a First Amendment argument. I mean, the main argument against this is that Twitter is a private company. They can do what they want, Facebook as well. I mean, conservatives' main issue with all of us is that Twitter doesn't enforce its rules evenly. Conservatives are targeted for censorship in a way that liberals, Democrats, even murderous tyrants are not. But as far as these lawsuits that Trump is filing, other people, other conservatives, Republicans have tried to file similar lawsuits. They just go nowhere. They get dismissed pretty easily because of the private company. You want to talk about Section 230, it's not going anywhere. I mean, this is going to take an act of Congress, and Congress just isn't really going to do anything like this. I mean, the way I always think about it is back with the fairness doctrines that liberals were trying to push, that because conservatives control the radio space, that they needed to give equal time to liberal point of views, right? So if you had a Rush Limbaugh, then either during Rush Limbaugh's show, half of it had to be liberal, or you had to also have a liberal host. And of course, those never went anywhere because radio stations are not public entities. Not even NPR is 100% public, right? It only gets a small percentage from taxpayers. So you can't really enforce something like that. You can't force something like that. And Twitter's just, they're not going to have to do anything, and they're not going to have to answer for this. And the other thing about Trump is that he's not even really doing this for conservatives or for those who have been censored. He's doing this for himself. He's fundraising off of it. He's getting a lot more press attention, right? He's back in the news as he's continuing to push that he might run again in 2024. I mean, this is just another Trump all about me stunt.
So Quinn Hillier, I know you're not massively into social media, but should these massive companies with such ubiquitous reach be able to ban who was then a sitting president of the United States?
Well, should they ban is different from whether they legally should be able to ban. And Ash makes a very good point. The First Amendment right is enjoyed by those companies, and they have a right to decide who does and doesn't go on their platform, as long as there's not some sort of monopoly situation, which actually there might be. But if there's not a monopoly where they are the only effective people out there, and somehow that gets more complicated. Except for that, they have a right to say who does and doesn't go on. Should they ban a former president of the United States? Probably no. And I've got no love lost for Trump. Twitter, Facebook, they are horrible to conservatives. They are unethically horrible to conservatives, but that's a legal question. I mean, but that's different from the legal question of whether they have a legal right to. Ash is right. Trump's lawsuit is going nowhere.
James Rosen, Quinn Hillier is suggesting there's some sort of, the fix is in from social media companies against conservatives. Is he right?
No, I'm not sure. I partially agree and I partially disagree. it took them how long? 5 years to ban Trump. I mean, he said a number of things that I consider bordering on traitorous and treasonous using Twitter. And I think he had more followers on Twitter than any person in the world. I could be wrong on that. Maybe the Pope had more, but he was in the top 2 or 3. And yes, he was a sitting president, but he was a sitting president who came close to urging his followers to commit treason. And I think it led directly to the insurrection. And I think the insurrection was absolutely treasonous. And I heard what he said yesterday at his news conference. He still is defending those people. He still is making excuses for them. And so to say he's a sitting president, he's in a class by himself. We never had a sitting president. I mean, I was an American history major at Berkeley, political science history, and I read a lot of political history. And I can say with great confidence, we never had a sitting president, Richard Nixon, anyone you want to name, who would have come even close to supporting those insurrectionists. Every single one of them would have absolutely damned them and distanced themselves. So to say he's a sitting president, he's isolated himself from all the previous presidents.
Ash Short, I'm seeing you here on our recording, not looking too convinced by that argument. Is President Trump committing treason via Twitter?
I said he came close. And he encouraged
look up the definition of treason. Just because you say it a bunch of times doesn't mean it's true. I mean, like, I'm not even a fan of Trump, but like these ideas that he's a treasonous, like this is traitorous, like this is
capital while there's
hyperbole.
And trying to saying that and chanting that you're going to kill the sitting vice president and going after them and making them take shelter with Capitol Police and go into bunkers. You don't think that sounds like treason? And then
Trump didn't tell them to do that. He told them to go up there and peacefully protest. Now you can say that he was saying things that led that on, but he did not tell them to go up there and try to kill the vice president or sitting members of Congress.
But after they did it,
also didn't
condemn it. He has not condemned it, not one time. Not forcefully. He's praised it more than.
Well, you say forcefully, and it's just like to your liking. I mean, that's the thing. Is like he's condemned these things so many times. He condemned white supremacy, but it was never enough. It was like, no, it wasn't forceful, and so every debate he had to condemn it again, and it wasn't enough. Like
you're contributing. I hate to say it, you're contributing to what the forces that he's.
Oh, so I'm traitorous now. Oh no, I'm a treasoner.
No, you're not traitorous, but you're a fellow traveler. I'm sorry. To act like to claim that he's condemned white, as you just said, that he's condemned white supremacists.
Oh my God, you can find so many articles of his quotes like condemning white supremacists. You just have to actually look for them and not just listen to CNN all day.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah, you don't think so doesn't mean you're right. It is true. He has absolutely condemned them numerous times.
Email me after the show. Email me 10 times where he condemned white supremacists.
Sure.
White supremacists.
Without being browbeaten into it, without having to be asked 20 times, without having to say, okay, yes, I condemn them, rather than actually looking and sounding like he means it. Because I have yet to see him look and sound like he means any.
Because he was asked a ton of times.
No, he hasn't. I mean,
he's asked at every juncture. Wait, no. I feel like I've suddenly become the conservative on this show. I'm supposed to be the libertarian.
But unfortunately, you're stating a factual record that doesn't exist. That's the unfortunate thing.
So, Ash Short, just to wrap up this final segment, let me give you the final word on this, just by asking that James Rosen alluded to the event where President Trump announced the lawsuit. And he called the January 6th event, without relitigating it, an unfortunate event, right. I believe was the words he used,
exactly.
Which some might say is an understatement. So doesn't that show, just to bring it back to our question, that these social media companies have made the right decision?
I mean, made the right decision. I don't know. If you want to read what some of the people did to defend the Black Lives Matter protests and any number of other things, like, I don't think it's honestly out of the norm. But he was a sitting president who said it. So you know, that would again be on them and their decision to do it. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it, but again, they're private companies, they can do it.
Okay, well, we can leave that one there for now, I think, because also this week, America's fastest woman sprinter, Sha'Carri Richardson, was snubbed by the US Olympic Committee. Here's the story from NBC News.
This morning, Team USA's track and field team is set for Tokyo, but one of its biggest stars, Sha'Carri Richardson, is not on the roster. The high-profile sprinter had a chance to be named to a relay team, but American track officials deciding not to include her. The 21-year-old tested positive for marijuana, a banned substance.
So, Quinn Hillier, has Sha'Carri Richardson been unfairly treated here, or are the rules the rules?
The rules are the rules. I have very little patience with people who say, oh, well, that's just pot or something like that. The fact of the matter is, and you can say that it shouldn't be this, but what should or ought be is different from what is. Marijuana is a federally forbidden substance. It is against federal law, and as it is against federal law, it is also very clearly stated that it is against the rules for Olympic athletes to use it. She knew that, she used it anyway, and she has to live with the consequences of that action.
James Rosen?
I pretty much agree with that. I mean, you know, most states have legalized pot. We're in a transition period. You know, nobody could have predicted, certainly 20 years, even 10 years ago, that marijuana would be legal in most states. But you know, it is the rule, and they're Olympic athletes, and they need to set examples. And I feel badly, but unfortunately, I agree.
Let me add one correction, though. Marijuana is actually not legal in any state in the country. All the states have done is said by state law, they will not enforce the federal law, but that doesn't make it legal, because it is still illegal in all 50 states by federal law.
Well, you know, maybe that's, with all due respect, that's a distinction without difference, because my son lives in Michigan, where I'm from, and is a rising musician. And I can just tell you that I won't name any names, that, you know, everybody in Michigan who wants to smoke marijuana is smoking openly, freely in public places, at clubs, at bars, at venues. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe it's not technically legal, but, you know.
If federal agents and federal prosecutors choose to arrest people in Michigan for smoking or for possessing or for dealing in marijuana, they can.
Is it true, and I could be wrong on this, but isn't it true that sodomy is still technically illegal in some states? I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, but
I'm talking about federal laws on marijuana. That's just the fact.
All right, but okay, then instead of saying it's legal, maybe I should say it's de facto legal.
Okay, so without getting into the legality too much of marijuana, Ash Short, where are you specifically on Sha'Carri Richardson? I mean, this is something that is de facto legal, however you want to look at it, in many states. Is it really performance enhancing? I'm not an expert there. So why should she be banned from sprinting because she smoked marijuana?
Well, it's a certain amount. Like, she's not banned forever, right? Like, it's like months or years or whatever. It'll keep her
I think
out
it's
of
a
this
one
Olympics, but
yeah, it's a 1 month ban, which
and,
effectively ended her Olympic chances.
Yeah, I mean, usually you think a runner might not be able to come back in 2, 3, 4 years. I mean, if the Olympics come back again in 2024, maybe she could still do it. Her chances are, you know, lower. I mean, on personally, like, yes, she did break the rule and she's accepted it. You know, she's not out there trying to say, this is unfair, this is awful, you're treating me unfairly, anything like that. She's like, I broke the rules, I knew it, this is what happens. But do I think the rule is necessarily fair? particularly in her case, which she was smoking weed to help with the death of her mom, and the fact that weed isn't going to help you at all when you're trying to run. It's definitely not performance enhancing. So, you know, maybe this is a type of case that sparks a change in the rules that already, the IOC had already previously increased the amount of THC that they could have from like 50 to 150 milligram, whatever the number it was. But so maybe they'll increase that again, or maybe they'll just not really have that.
Okay, well, thank you all for your thoughts on that one. Let's try and quickly, I know we're running out of time, take a couple of questions that have been sent in from our listeners. And Owen Harvey asks, why complete the Afghanistan withdrawal on the 9/11 anniversary? That just reminds everyone of why we went in the first place. Now, of course, slight caveat is that the White House are now saying that all the troops will be gone by the end of August. But that initial announcement did say we'll be out by 9/11. Owen Harvey wants to know, why would you do that? Who wants to jump in?
Dumb. Just dumb. I mean, 9/11 was one of the worst days in American history. So, like, why would you do it? It's politically tone deaf, and something of this import and gravity. Why use superficial symbolism?
Particularly since a lot of the extremists love to use dates to carry out new attacks. That would just be like the handing them a big, you know, package with a bow on it. It'll attack us. It's your favorite date. No idea who in the White House thought that was a good idea, but definitely glad that they changed it real quick.
Quinn Hillier?
I agree with what James and Ash have said. Don't have anything to add to it.
More agreement, my goodness. Okay, well, let's go to Jeanette Lamb, who on the Trump and social media story asks, don't Facebook, Twitter, etc., as private companies have a right not to associate with Donald Trump if they don't want to? And I think, Quinn Hillier, that's kind of the point you were making. I don't know if any of
made the same point as well. And the answer is yes. They, in most cases, you know, except some very rare circumstances, they have a First Amendment right not to allow their platform to be used for speech that they do not agree with.
Okay, if I can just quickly add, I think that's generally true, but when you look at the power of Fox News and, in my opinion, the overwhelmingly bad effect it's had on American democracy, I think these massive social media companies and the big networks, even though they may technically be private companies, I think they're so powerful that you know, if Fox can ban whoever they want and just have, and I'm arguing the other side here, but if they can just ban the other side, you know, whoever they want, and just become an extreme right talking platform, and if Twitter and Facebook can ban whoever they want and become seen as a left-wing talking point, I mean, that's actually how Europe functions. I lived in Europe for some years, and Europe and I think other countries in like around the world, their big media platforms are generally associated, except for the BBC, which is government owned and it's pretty much straight down the middle. It's a media outlet I really admire, but most other big newspapers and media companies in the country, in other countries, are associated with one view or another. It's just that's what American democracy was never supposed to be about that.
Okay, well, if we want to leave that one there, I'm glad to move on to my favorite segment where I always learn something new, and that is the most underreported story of the week. And Ash Short, do you have a good one for us?
Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, Tucker Carlson says that the NSA has been reading his emails and spying on him and like some political hit job, which of course sounded ridiculous. But then Axios's Jonathan Swan actually wrote an article that was, okay, here it was. NSA did kind of collect his emails because as incidental or whatever, because he was trying to get an interview with Vladimir Putin. And we found out that he was unmasked during this, which was kind of like, why would you unmask someone who was trying to get an interview with Vladimir Putin when NBC has interviewed him, other outlets have interviewed him, that's a thing that journalists do, and you have to, it's Putin. You can't go find the good guys that are connected to him, like there's going to be bad guys. So it kind of raises a question of whether, like, how could this not be a political hit job? But for me, I just need, way more information on it. But I do think that it's going to be, it's a story that, for obvious reason, only Tucker's really going to cover, and that we're not going to get the answers that we need for it.
Definitely sounds like some freedom of the press issues in there as well. Quinn Hillier, you have an underreported story for us this week?
Yes, it's sort of reported among conservatives, but not more widely, and it should be. And that is, there is serious concern, especially in the conservative legal community, about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not been as conservative as conservatives had hoped, and there are a lot of indications that Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh, two new justices, are much more often, as a matter of fact, joining John Roberts, the Chief Justice, in the middle, rather than doing straight line textualist, originalist jurisprudence. Yet again, it looks, it's like Lucy pulling the ball away from Charlie Brown. Some conservatives in the legal community are really worried that there is this new centrist bloc forming, and more evidence for that came with at least 3 new cases, continuing a trend where they denied certiorari. They have chosen not to hear cases that conservatives thought were absolute slam dunks to at least be heard by the court. 2 of them involve religious rights. One of them involves a transgender issue. And again, the court isn't even agreeing to hear the case. And the case is. It's something to watch, and I don't think mainstream media is really caught on.
James Rosen, bring us home. What's your most underreported story this week?
Up and down the East Coast, but particularly in Florida, you have these towering, heavy, massive buildings that were built in dangerous areas, and I was flabbergasted by the fact that the board of the homeowners association recommended substantial repairs to that condo building several years ago at least, and the residents got in a big fight and couldn't agree on it because of the cost. And I think that's a tragedy. But I think the deeper problem is that a lot of these buildings should not be built where they are. And the older ones need to be torn down. I mean, we're seeing that happen now with several other buildings in the area. I think there's a lot more that's going to come out in this story in the coming weeks and months.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll end up talking about it here if and when it does. Hopefully not, but you never know. And I think that's all we have time for now. So I'd like to thank our guests, Ash Short, Quinn Hillier, James Rosen. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for listening to The Square Circle, or watching if you have been. We'll be back next week.